Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here with Diablo 4 Season 2 coming right up, and I've theorycrafted quite a few builds. Today I want to showcase another one for you guys to take a look and perhaps consider playing. Today I'm going to cover the Shadow Golemancer. This is a build that I made in Season 1, and it has done quite well over the seasons. I played it in Season 2, and it does pretty well. The idea behind the build is that you are basically a Lord of the Dead, and when you walk near enemies, your minions just have fairly unconditionally high damage, and it works pretty well. There are quite a lot of changes from Season 2 with this build, and I want to quickly go over those. If you do want the detailed write-up, all the details with the skills, the leveling, and the vast details of the Paragon board for this build, please make sure to check out the build on Mobalytics in its written form. You can find the link for that below. Mobalytics is home of the crit builds, and I hope you guys enjoy this build and the others. So, in Season 2, we had a lot of different mechanics that empowered characters in different ways. Most characters more than doubled their damage through vampiric powers. However, and I have tested this, Necromancer was not among those if you chose to play minions. Even think like there's an affix that says your companions do 60% more damage. That actually only 30% of that was being applied to your minions. So the calculations were really wonky. It's usually been like that with minions. And Blizzard has said that they are going to take a look at these issues. And I think they should. Right now, I believe the Shadow Golemancer is going to be a very strong build. One of the better builds that you can play on Season 3 launch, but if they do something like the Abattoir of Zir, where you get like giga damage multipliers and all that kind of stuff, because usually only 30% of that is usually passed on to your minions, I can see why minion builds would fall off if we are given extra power later on. But I've done the numbers, and most characters going from Season 2 to Season 3 are losing between 50 and 70% of their damage from the loss of vampiric powers. And gladly, I am here to say that Necromancer minion builds are not among those. Necromancer minion builds, I've done the math, are going to lose only about 24% of their damage, but with the minion changes and buffs that we received in Season 3, I think out of the box, it is perhaps the only build that is across the board stronger than it was in Season 2, even if we do not consider the Seneschal Construct, which is the Season 3 mechanic. But since we're on the topic, let's talk about the Seneschal Construct. So, we don't really know how much damage this construct is really going to do. It might give us a lot of damage. It might not. The Golemancer build does actually pretty good single target damage, pretty good damage against a few targets. It struggles a little bit if you don't successfully corpse tendrils or put all the mobs in one spot with like big AoE clear. I am hoping that this is something that the Seneschal Construct can help with. They said that the construct scales with your entire character's stats, which is really good, especially for Necros, because I think it's also possible that the aspects that work on your minions might actually work on the Seneschal Construct. So your minions, this is going to be like 80% more damage after 10 seconds, potentially. So almost doubling the damage. The Blighted aspect, almost tripling your damage, is a tooltip thing, and it actually works on all your minions, and I have no doubt this will work on the Construct. We have the Frenzied Dead. This one says each of your summoning minions gets attack speed. This one, I don't know if it'll work. It's really difficult to say what will and won't work, but I have to imagine that some of it will work. We also have the Raised Skeleton, and when you have maximum Raised Skeletons, you get the Skeleton Priest. It increases the damage of all your minions by a 30% multiplier. Again, I'm actually expecting this to work on the Seneschal. The way that all minions and companions and summons work in the game is they use their own attack speed and then they use the damage of your weapon. Now, because when you're playing a full minion build like a Necromancer, like this one, you actually want to use a two-handed scythe, which is the slowest weapon in the game, at 0.9 attacks per second, but it has extremely high damage per hit. So I believe that we don't know if the Seneschal is actually going to do meaningful amounts of damage, but I believe that a Summoner Necromancer's Seneschal should easily do the most, because unlike most builds, we use a two-handed slow weapon, and unlike most builds, we have aspects that deliberately multiply the damage involved. So that's all great. What's not great about this build? Well, there is one thing that Necromancers lost from Vampiric powers that they do struggle to get back. While the Seneschal construct can give you pretty good clear, hopefully, it can have like near full uptime on shadow damage over time to enable those effects. It'll fix the vulnerable problem. It's hopefully going to taunt stuff to release pressure off your other minions, give you damage reduction, all that kind of stuff. One thing that the Seneschal construct cannot do is give you Unstoppable. So Unstoppable is an effect where it makes your character immune to crowd control, but most importantly, it is what is required to trigger Tybalt's Will, which is currently the best set of pants, honestly, for all classes in the game. So when you get Unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, you get 40% more damage. And you get primary resource. This damage is tooltip sheet damage, so it will affect your minions in full, so it is crazy to disregard this. So the way that we have to get Unstoppable is Blood Mist. We have to go back to using Blood Mist, and there is literally no other way to do this for Necromancer. So while your minions are going to be stronger than ever, while you're going to have the strongest Seneschals in Season 3, while the build is overall buffed in pretty much every way possible, your immunity to crowd control will be worse as not just a Summoner Necromancer, as any Necromancer in Season 3. In regards to the summons, we received a number of changes and buffs that largely had to do with golems. Previously, we used the Bone Golem. Didn't really matter which one you used, because the Bone Golem auto attack was a cleave, while the Blood Golem and Iron Golem had single target attacks. In Season 3, they're making the Blood Golem and the Iron Golem also use area of effect for their default attacks, and the Blood Golem does 50 more damage if it's above, if it's healthy, so if it's above 85% health. In my experience, the Golem is pretty much invincible in Diablo 4, so it will always have this bonus. And that's really good. The Blood Golem also has a usability that does pretty significant damage. It's like 200% of weapon damage, and it does triple damage if it only hits one target, because it's kind of like a wide AoE. This is a lot of damage. It was hitting for nearly 2 million on my Season 2 character, and it wasn't exactly optimized for that purpose. So that is pretty damn sick when it comes to Necromancers. One other change that I have is I'm now a flicker step enjoyer for the Shadow Golemancer, because we're not triggering Unstoppable, so the Ghost Walker doesn't really make sense anymore. We're just going to have higher uptime on Bone Storm, and that is pretty good. A few changes with the build. We are still getting 3 points in Reap, because you might choose to use that over Blood Mist until you get the Tybalt's Will, and after that, there's really nothing else to get in those first few points. I do have 5 points in Blood Mist, because we want that Tybalt's Will proc going up as often as possible. Just like before, we want the spiked armor, we want some form of thorns to trigger CDR procs from Decrepify. And the rest of the build is honestly very similar. A few notes. the Bonded in Essence. I didn't really need it in Season 2 when I had my character up and running, and they buffed the base amount of healing to, I believe, 40% now. So it's kind of like having an extra point in Bonded in Essence, which again wasn't really needed. So I don't think you really need any points there. Death's Defense gives your minions armor and all resists. At least that's what it says. But actually, I tested it last season, and it only gave the resistance bonus to your skeleton mages. And if you're confused by that, I am also confused by that. I have tested this recently in the days before the Season 3 patch, and unfortunately, it looks like instead of it giving the bonus to the skeleton mages, it doesn't give resistances to anything. This just doesn't work. So if at some point they decide to fix this bug, I think this is actually a really good node and will eventually allow us to sub out some of the currently mandatory glyphs. I like the idea of using fairly unconditional damage for minions because minions, they can sometimes be a bit tricky. I use the Mage Glyph, and the Mage Glyph is something I'd consider dropping at a later point, especially if they fix the passive that should give resistances. But the Mage Glyph gives all minions 35% all resists, so you cannot pass that up on your minions. Your minions will not survive without that glyph. A really big change is the change to the Golem glyph. So in addition to the Blood Golem, which already did more damage than the Blood Golem, and does 50 more damage on top of that, and you lose practically nothing from Season 2 Vampiric Powers in terms of damage, the bonus on the Golem glyph used to be 25% health multiplier, and it is now 25% damage multiplier. So that Golem is going to be slapping harder than any minion has ever done so in Diablo 4. So it is a pretty interesting case. The Paragon board is almost identical to previous seasons, but it is the actual changes that they made to abilities that we were already getting and glyphs that we were already using. So overall, the Shadow Golemancer should be pretty awesome next season. Again, while I think it's going to be a pretty top-tier build, especially for Necromancer, it might scale down if they introduce new forms of power before they fix minion scaling. Because again, minions getting only like 30% of each of the damage scaling stats, you're just getting less multipliers at the end of the day. With the current form, with only the Seneschal actually being the form of power for Season 3, that is massively favored for minion necromancers. But again, if they change that later on, we'll have to see. For now, you necromancers have a lot to look forward to, and I hope you enjoy the build guide. And again, if you want to see the written format, make sure to check out the link below.